Have you ever heard the phrase critic within? I ask because I recently discovered that a lot of people actually have never heard that phrase before. So let's take a look at what critic within means, what you can do to recognize the value of it, and how to control it. So what is the critic within? What does that phrase even mean? You can think of it as a crossing guard. Okay? So, and in case you're unfamiliar, a crossing guard, that's the person who is at a crosswalk, usually at an intersection. They have the stop sign. In the United Kingdom, I think they're called lollipop men. But I'm not sure. I think lollipop men might also refer to the folks at construction sites that have the stop and yield signs. But a crossing guard just has a stop sign, and they walk out and they stand in the intersection, in the crosswalk, with a stop sign so that cars know there are kids crossing the crosswalk. Okay, so think of it as a crossing guard. Well, is there a crossing guard at every single intersection? No. Yeah, the critic within also only raises its head, only becomes apparent once in a while. The whole point of a crossing guard is that it draws your attention to, hey, there's a situation here. You need to be aware. And in the case of a crossing guard, the situation is that there are little kids crossing the street, which is why you get an adult who usually has one of the traffic vests on and is holding a stop sign. Sometimes they have a whistle. So they step out into the street to, hey, look, stop, because there are kids crossing, and kids are like 3 feet tall. So you could easily not see them. Hence the need for a crossing guard. The whole idea is that it draws your attention to, hey, there's a situation here, you might want to think, you might want to take some precautions. And the best example I have ever heard of this actually comes from a friend of mine, Dan Kennedy. And I mentioned this in a video before where I talked about him getting his license to drive sulkies, which is a type of horse racing. And I did some checking. Dan actually went to get his license at age 46, which is quite late. People who are going to get it usually get it around 18, 20, 25, that kind of age. And he tells the story. Now I'm going to tell a very short version of it here. He tells the story that when he started thinking about going to get his sulky driver's license at age 46, the critic within started with, people are going to tease you, you are already a very busy guy, do you have the money to do this? All the objections that you could possibly come up with, his critic within came up with. And the basic idea is that your critic within is saying, hey, wait a second, you're about to do something rather unusual that is quite possibly going to move you beyond your current comfort zone. So maybe you should think twice. And Dan's point in telling the story is that he listened to his critic within and answered back each of the issues. You're a busy guy. Well, Dan is also self-employed, so he is able to rearrange his own schedule. Within that, you're a busy guy. What if you are in Los Angeles or Dallas or Atlanta and you have to get back home, and he lives in Ohio, you have to get back home to do training or to compete in a race? Well, again, Dan is self-employed. He's also very successful, and he's willing to make the investment to charter a private plane and drive back home for this endeavor. or fly back home for this endeavor. So the whole point of Dan's story is that he listened and he was able to address each of the concerns. And that's an important point, because when your mind, when your subconscious raises an objection and you just poo-poo it, it never goes away. And in fact, your subconscious latches on to the doubt and starts to build on it. Unless you are able to say, so for example, in Dan's case, one of the objections from his critic within is, this is going to be really expensive. Now, Dan already owned, when he started looking at doing this, he already owned, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 standard bred racehorses. Plus he owned, or was a part owner of, several dozen thoroughbred racehorses. So he was able to, okay, one, I don't have to rent horses or sulkies, I already have all of that equipment. And two, the money that it costs, whether that's to charter a private plane, whether it's to buy the clothing necessary, the investment that he would make into getting his license, he was able to look at it and say, you know what, I'm 46 years of age. I have become very successful, and this is something that I want to do. It is an indulgence. And yes, it is an expensive indulgence. And yes, I have the resources to do it. So he received the objection, he recognized that his mind was making an objection, and he answered it. This is my answer to that objection. Because your mind is going to latch onto whatever is in front of it and available for latching onto. And Dan knows, I know, and I'm hoping to help you know, that what you want to do is when your mind says, what about this? You need to be able to answer it and say, here's my answer to that. Now that probably took as long as Dan telling his story, and was probably way less interesting than when Dan tells the story. And yes, I do have a script, 2 sheets of paper this time, hopefully keep it short. The other point I marked down is, and this is why you want to answer the objections that your critic within raises. A crossing guard can sometimes become overzealous. And I'm sure we have all seen YouTube videos or TikTok videos or whatever about this kind of thing, where a crossing guard starts yelling at drivers, or, they end up being an impediment rather than being a help. And false beliefs or unanswered objections can become an impediment to you achieving your success. When the critic within becomes a barrier to your success, it is actually doing something it was never intended to do. We need to recognize the critic within is a useful thing. Having something, it's sort of like the conscience that speaks to you in the back of your mind and says, don't kick that dog. Don't cheat your neighbor. Okay, your conscience tells you things that you shouldn't do because they're wrong to do. The critic within brings up things that might be an obstacle to achieving your success. If you treat it as a warning tool, then the critic within can become very useful. If you treat it as a stop sign, as reasons to not try, then you're allowing it to become something it should never ever be. And I kind of dived pretty deeply into the whole idea of Dan, and the cost of doing or becoming a sulky driver. And there were lots of other objections that his Critic Within raised. The fact that he's 46 and he could get hurt. Okay, that's a real concern. So one of the things that he made sure to do was train with his own staff, with his own people, so they recognize, all right, let's work at learning this without making this truly competitive. Save the competition for when he's actually in a race. The other part of it is, the reality of it is, yes, you can get hurt. And that's true of taking a shower. You could slip and fall in the tub. So something that Dan recognized is I need to train well, I need to make sure that I know what I'm doing, but I also need to be realistic. The prospect of getting hurt by driving a sulky and competing in a race is no greater than falling in the bathroom or getting burnt in the kitchen. It is significantly less dangerous than driving a car. So sometimes when your Critic Within raises an issue, for example, the cost of learning to be a sulky racer. In Dan's case, okay, I have the success, I have the money, this is something I want to do. Is it an indulgence? Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to indulge myself. At 46 years of age, I can afford to indulge myself. Is it dangerous? Yes. So are a lot of other things in life. The fact is that learning to race a sulky is far less dangerous than many other endeavors in which we engage on a regular and sometimes daily basis, such as driving a car. The idea that other drivers would ridicule him and think of him as a dilettante, some rich guy just, giving this a shot kind of thing. Okay, that's going to happen. In Dan's case, and it should be in everyone's case, Dan has no care or concern for what other people think. He is doing what he is doing. He also knows, and this is what he told his Critic Within, that yes, they are going to be critical of me when I first start. And so, I have my trainer, and I believe at the time, I'm not sure if it's still the same fellow, but his head trainer's name was also Conrad. Just a coincidence. And Dan knew that as he trained and showed that he is serious about being there, that other drivers, other trainers would come to accept him being there. And I hope I'm making the point that whatever your Critic Within puts forward, acknowledge it, and have an answer for it. In the same way that if you are in a mastermind session and someone raises, if you're going to send direct mail, make sure that someone has reached this level of engagement with you before you send direct mail. Or if you are using it as a lead generation thing, then make sure you stick with, for example, postcards, because they are less expensive. You might remember, and I hope you've seen the earlier videos that are in the Value for Self-Help series, that I have talked about building a strong, positive self-image. Well, Dan has a very strong, very positive self-image. He knows who he is. He has confidence in his abilities. And this is an important piece of being able to respond to your Critic Within. Remember, your self-image is in your subconscious too. Your self-image is part of who you are. And the Critic Within is natural doubt. Am I able to do this? The kind of spice is that it throws things at you deliberately to try to get you to stop. And this is just a natural part of who we are. However, as you work at building a strong, positive self-image, that inclination of the critic within to be, you can't do this, that gets reduced. And your critic within becomes a tool to more say, hey, what about the amount of time it's going to take? What about the investment it's going to require? What about your wife and kids or your husband and kids? What about the rest of your business? Can you afford to take time away from the rest of your business to do this? It becomes much more of an advisor than a critic. I have some notes here in the script to share parts of my life story, because the key difference to whether your critic within is a useful thing and becomes an advisor, or your critic within becomes a barrier, a stopper to your success, is the nature of your beliefs about yourself. It is the strength and positivity of your self-image. When your self-image is strong, well developed, you are looking at yourself in a positive light, it is much easier to take the feedback from your critic within and recognize it as, hey, here's some things to be aware of. So the notes I have are about my parents and their sort of open rejection of me. Now, their rejection of me when we were at home, and there was nobody else to see it other than my brother and sister, they were very open about rejecting me. When we were out in public, oh, no, they would never ever admit that they didn't want me, they didn't care about me, no. So there is that dichotomy, and I'm sure that there will be people watching this video currently experiencing the same thing. What I say to that is, recognize what it is your parents are doing. In my case, so one of the first incidents, I had taken on, my sister had a paper route, and then my brother took over that paper route, and he expanded. She had the Niagara Falls Review, he took it over, he took the Niagara Falls Review and the Times Review, which was a very local newspaper. And then eventually, when he went to high school, no longer had time to do the papers, same as my sister had done, I took over those paper routes. Except when I did it, my parents said, don't do that. But I did it anyway. Now, my rationale was, well, my brother took it over from my sister, I'm going to take it over from him. Why should I not do it? So they didn't actively stop me. But at one point, and I guess I should mention, so I took the Niagara Falls Review, I took the Times Review, I also got the Toronto Star route, and the Globe and Mail route. So I had 4 newspaper routes. And the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail were first thing in the morning newspapers. The Niagara Falls Review and the Times Review were after school newspapers. So one week, I have done all my collecting, I have all the money, I'm sorting it out, and I asked my mother if she would please come and help me sort this out so I have the money to pay each of the newspapers. Her response was, no. We told you not to take those paper routes. So you are on your own. If you can't handle it, too bad. Wow. Thanks, right? So maybe your parents are doing the same kind of thing. You've taken on something that they never wanted you to take on, and now they're unwilling to support you in doing it. It's hard. Believe me, I know it's hard because I lived through it. I also failed to do it. I internalized what my parents were doing. And I allowed it to become a belief in myself that I was unworthy. If my parents didn't love me, the people who gave me life didn't love me and didn't want me, then I must be worthless. Okay. That's what I chose to believe. I am encouraging you to make a different choice. I am encouraging you to recognize your parents are doing something parents are never supposed to do. Parents have a duty, an obligation to love their children. They just don't always do it. And it has nothing to do with anything being inherently wrong with you. Now, let me draw a line here. Because my parents rejected me, and because I chose to internalize it and believe bad things about myself, I started to behave in bad ways. So there actually became a problem with me. I was misbehaving. I was doing things that were wrong. So if you are misbehaving and doing things that are wrong, recognize you are doing those things. And you need to separate, here's what I'm doing, and that's wrong. Here's what my parents are doing, and that's wrong. I can control this because this is me. This is me choosing to do those things. I have no control over this. And it really sucks. But it is not my fault, and it is not my responsibility. My parents are their own people. They will answer for their own choices. This is me, and I'm making these choices, and I have to answer for them. So make sure you draw that distinction. I also want to draw the distinction between what I was believing as a teenager and into my 20s versus what I believe now. So the fundamental belief that I had as a teenager is what I said a couple of minutes ago. If I am unworthy of my parents' love, then I am worthless and deserve nothing. Did I believe that verbatim? No. But that was the fundamental nature of the belief. And it generated a lot of anger in me. Which, okay, yeah, anybody would get angry over that. Versus now, I recognize what I was saying before. My parents made a choice, and they are responsible for that choice. I also made choices, and I'm responsible for what I did. And I now recognize they're separate. They're two different things. I have no responsibility for what my parents chose. Also, my parents were wrong. I know because I can remember. When I was a kid, people loved me. My grandmother had no difficulty with me. My Aunt Jerry had no difficulty with me. I stayed with the Sagers. They had no troubles with me. I stayed with Aunt Bessie and Cowboy. They had no troubles with me. I was able to get everyone on my street to subscribe to the 4 newspapers that I delivered. And many of them subscribed because I asked them to. So I would go to somebody and say, would you subscribe to, for example, the Toronto Star? Oh, I have no real need for the Toronto Star, that's such a big paper. And so I would put it to them, okay, I understand that, but the reason I'm asking is because the more folks that I have subscribing to the newspaper, the more money I make as a newspaper carrier, and the better that will be for me as I move forward. So when I started carrying the newspapers, and I believe I was 9 years of age, might have been 10, definitely by the time I was 10, but it might have been 9 years of age. So I had a positive outlook. I thought, I'm going to take these newspaper routes, I'm going to make a ton of money, I'm going to sock it away, and I'm going to be really successful. And within about 2 years, my parents managed to turn that 180 degrees. I stopped paying for the newspapers, I stopped delivering the newspapers. The newspaper companies said, we aren't sending you any newspapers anymore because you don't pay for them. It turned into a fiasco. And if you are in the same situation, so you are, a teenager, you're still at home, you're still figuring things out, recognize that you are doing what you are doing right now because of the direction you are getting from your parents, for the instruction you are getting from your parents. Without rebelling, without calling them names or being openly disagreeable, it is perfectly okay for you to stop, recognize you're making some bad choices, and recognize the things that my parents are saying to me are bad things. An example, we were talking one night at the kitchen table, or more accurately, my parents were talking with my brother, and I just sat at the kitchen table, and they were talking about sending him to university. Well, I piped up and said, "Oh, I want to go to university too." The whole kitchen went silent. My father looked at me and said, "Well, if you want to go to university, then you better get out and get yourself a job, because we're not paying for it." Now, do you see the contradiction there? When I'm 9, 10 years of age, I'm going out, not only do I get 2 newspaper routes, I get 4, and I'm working at earning money. That they squash. That they have zero intention of supporting. Later on, when we're looking at university, it's, well, you better go get a job. Okay, I could have had a job. I could have been delivering those newspapers the entire time I was going to school. But no, my parents had to squash that. So parents do sometimes make bad, destructive choices for their children. And again, you need to recognize there is a difference between your parents trying to stop you from doing something like delivering the newspapers, or saying, there is no way we're paying for you to go to university, but we'll pay for your siblings to go, versus stop playing those video games and go to bed, or stop playing those video games and go do your homework. Those are good choices. That's discipline. And they're trying to teach you life is not all play. You have homework to do, you have chores to do, you need to go to bed, you need to eat healthy. And as kids, we hate that stuff. Oh, my parents are always telling me what to do. Yeah, your parents are supposed to tell you what to do. They're supposed to teach you how to live and help you build a strong, healthy self-image. So, let's be honest, and if that is what they're doing, then Cranium Ex Rectum, listen to your parents, recognize the reason you are being chastised is because you are making bad choices, versus hear what your parents are doing, recognize that they're making bad, destructive choices, they're trying to hold you down, and making a choice for yourself that, okay, I am just going to leave them alone. I'm not going to ask them for advice. I'm not going to tell them what it is that I'm doing unless it's absolutely necessary. And I will, for example, turn to my Aunt Jerry, or I'll turn to my grandmother, or I'll turn to my teachers, or a coach, or somebody like that. Okay? There are a lot of lines here, and it's really easy to cross them. So, I get that if you are a teenager, this can be really, really difficult. I get that. And I get it because I lived through it. I also get that I made bad choices. And I'm doing these videos because I want you to hear the bad choices I made and then make better choices. Okay. I'm pretty much at the end of the script here. And I realize this has probably gotten a lot longer than I intended it to be. So I want to wrap up with this. Be careful about believing, okay, and I'm reading it right from what I typed. Be careful about believing that change takes a long time or must be difficult. A change can happen instantaneously. The example I'll use is my father told the story several times about him quitting smoking. And what it was is he woke up one day, he's getting out of bed, and he went to take his first cigarette. Like most smokers, as soon as he wakes up, he lights a cigarette. And on this day, he pulls out the cigarette, he's getting ready to light it, and he just thinks, you know what? This is not who I want to be. I have no desire to be a slave to these things anymore. He put the cigarette away, threw all of his cigarettes out, and stopped smoking right then and there. Now, the reason I picked that story is because you will hear people tell you that stopping smoking is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. Most people who try to stop smoking fail. There are all kinds of stories about it. Change takes time when you are not committed to making the change. Now, what about a habit? So, stopping smoking, my father did that just with a decision. But there was still the habit of putting something in his mouth. And in my father's case, he never really addressed that habit, which is why by the time he was in his 60s, the guy was 400 pounds. Because instead of smoking and putting a cigarette in his mouth, he was putting food in his mouth. And he really enjoyed sugar. He really enjoyed sweets. So he became a very fat person. So building a habit is something that you do naturally. We build the habit to brush our teeth. And that builds naturally because your parents are telling you to brush your teeth every night. We build the habit to make our bed. We build that habit because our parents are telling us to make our bed every day. Keep our room clean. Change your underwear. All these kinds of things. When you get a little older, so in your teenage years, in your 20s, and then beyond, 30s, 40s, and so on, you recognize, I should change something. And one that I changed is I realized I was still eating, even though I had retired from construction, I was still eating like I was working in construction. And at my heaviest, I got to be 354 pounds. Now, I was just at the doctor's yesterday. No, this is Saturday. I was at the doctor's Thursday. Weighed myself. I am now 250 pounds. So that's pretty good. I've dropped off 104 pounds. How did I do it? I recognized that I was just eating way too much. And I needed to build a new habit around eating. I needed to change my diet. Not dieting, not doing some fad, but changing, in my case, how much I eat. I still eat the same stuff. Let's correct that. So, I very rarely eat fast food anymore. So no fast food burgers and fries, no pizza. I rarely go to a restaurant to eat. Mostly because the portion sizes are just way too big. So everything I eat, I pretty much cook at home. I eat no prepared foods, except for stuff like peanut butter. But say like a Hungry Man dinner or a pre-made lasagna, something like that, I never buy that stuff. Everything I eat, I need to make. And the big thing was changing from, so I would sit down and I would eat 2 pork chops, a bunch of potatoes and a bunch of vegetables with some bread for 1 serving. And I might go back and have another serving. Now I know the way pork chops are cut these days. So if you go to Costco or Loblaws or Kroger's or whoever, and you buy a pork chop, that pork chop could very easily be 2 servings in size. Okay, because a serving of meat is 4 ounces. And a pork chop is usually somewhere around 8 ounces. So I had recognized how much is a serving for meat, how much is a serving for vegetables. So now when I make a meal, I have somewhere between 2/3 and a cup worth of meat, so around 4 ounces, maybe 5. I have 1/3 cup of quinoa and 2/3 cups of mixed vegetables. So my servings are way, way, way smaller. And just that, just changing my habit from eating great big huge meals to breakfast now is an egg, a slice of bacon, slice of toast with peanut butter, and a slice of chunk cheese. As opposed to 3 eggs, 5 or 6 slices of bacon, 4 slices of toast, and a bunch of hash browns. Okay, so change does not have to take a long time. Change can happen very, very quickly. The thing you need to be aware of is, do I actually want to make this change? That's a hard one. That's also a very personal one. Questions, comments, by all means, please put them below. If you could, I would very much appreciate you hitting the thumbs up, and if you could subscribe. The reason I say that is these are 2 metrics that YouTube actually uses. And I'll be honest, I care more about comments than I do about a thumbs up or a subscribe. I ask for the thumbs up and subscribe because these are metrics that YouTube uses, and when you do those things, it helps other people see this same content and benefit from it. I like the comments because that's an opportunity to engage with you. Whether I answer the comment directly or I take the comments, group them together, and answer them in a video. Either way, that's me getting an opportunity to interact with you. And I hugely, genuinely appreciate that. So there you go. Again, more personal choices for you. Have a good day.